Okay, for the last 5 Torah portions in the Torah, in the book of Exodus, this is where we are now, deal with the construction of the Mishkan. The Mishkan was the first worship space, the tabernacle, the place where God lived among the people Israel. So we have Truma and Tetzaveh, which set out God's commandment, and Vayakhel Pekudei, which talk about the fulfillment of that commandment. So what we've been doing during this time, because that's a little bit dry, it sounds like a Home Depot commercial. What we've been doing this time is to trace the history of Jewish worship. And we started some weeks ago talking about worship in the Bible, how there were 2 parallel worship traditions. The personal tradition was prayer, which was spontaneous and emotional and expressive. And the communal tradition, which was sacrifice, which was fixed and organized and articulated. And how the rabbis, in the second episode, the rabbis came along when the temple was destroyed and tried to merge these 2 traditions and created out of the spontaneous traditions of prayer what we call services. The organized, articulated, rule-bound, systematic system of worship, but how the rabbis even themselves were not sure this was going to work because they weren't sure that you could squeeze personal, expressive religion, spontaneous feelings of closeness to God. You can squeeze that into the structure and form that the sacrifices came from. Now, last week we took a break from that and we took a look at the golden calf narrative. And today what I want to do is go back to it and talk about the people I think in Jewish history who took prayer the most seriously. And that's the Hasidic tradition. And to show you that I'm not don't open the Chumash, I'll just read this for you. To show you that I'm not completely out of my mind here. There's a little episode at the end of the golden calf narrative, which we just got to very, very late in our conversation last week, which I want to go back to simply one line in it. What happens is after Moses comes down the mountain, smashes the tablets, God declares, I can't live with this people. I can't live with this people. And God departs from the people. And Moses departs from the people, and Moses prays to God and says, look, if you don't lead us, I don't leave from here either. We're going to die right here in the desert. And God relents and says, okay, I will go with you. And then Moses turns to God in the 33rd chapter with this remarkable, strange narrative. It's a very, very strange, rough narrative, like badly edited. And he says to him, you've told me to go with this people. You recruited me from my privacy. You took me into the public. You made me a leader. You've never told me who you are. And the line that's remarkable is, Hareini et kvodecha. Hareini et kvodecha. Show me your glory, your presence. Now what's remarkable about that line is both pieces of it. Number one, we are used to religious language in first person plural. We are used to Avinu Malkeinu, our King and our Father. We're used to Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avotenu, our God and God of our ancestors. We're very unused to, in some ways you could even say we're uncomfortable with this notion of personal, first person religion. Hareini, show me. He doesn't say to the people, he doesn't say to God, show us. He says, show me. This is Moses' personal, private, religious quest. And what he wants to know, he's got all the commandments now. He's got all of the ethics. He's got all of the formal religiosity. What he wants to know is, who are you? Hareini et kvodecha is the Torah's way of saying, show me your essence. And by the way, the Torah doesn't want to show him, because the next line is Adonai, Adonai, Rachum v'chanun. It's all these qualities. It's like he's asking for something, and what he's asking there is what we call in the history of religion mysticism. Mysticism is that personal search for a knowledge of God, for an experience of God, for an encounter with the divine. Hareini et kvodecha. Show me what you are. Show me your essence. Again, in Jewish life, we're not comfortable with first-person religion. We very rarely pray me. We always pray us. And we're very, very uncomfortable talking about what God is. It's assumed in the Bible you sort of know what God is. And what we're interested in is how God relates to the world, the ethics of God, what's godly, but this notion of what God is, to confront that. This is what you call mysticism. Mysticism is an old Jewish tradition. It's been part of our tradition. It's actually part of every religion's tradition. Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, all of them have their mystics. That is, people who said, I'm not interested in what the communal, what the collective religious experience is. I want my own. All religion is about a knowledge of God, but this is, I want my own, and I don't want it mediated. I don't want something between me and God. I don't want a tradition or a mitzvah or a Torah between me and God. I want to face God face to face. This always this occurs in all religious traditions, and it occurs in Jewish tradition. And for a long time, for the end of the 19th and early 20th century, it was buried because it became something very elaborate. And the rationalists, the reasonable religious reformers of the 19th and early 20th centuries were sort of embarrassed by this. And so they tried to hide it. Right? Superstition, mysticism became a synonym for superstition. So when I went to JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary, they invited the great scholar of Jewish mysticism was a man named Gershon Scholem, taught at the Hebrew University. And Gershon Scholem was invited to give a lecture at JTS. And the students who were the most fabrent of the students, the most powerful of the students, they ran to the leader, the academic head of the place was Saul Lieberman, and they said, Professor Lieberman, how can you invite this man? He teaches Narishkeit. Narishkeit is the Yiddish word for nonsense, stupidity. He teaches Narishkeit. How can you invite a guy who teaches Narishkeit? And Lieberman, who had a wicked sense of humor, if you could find it, right, said to them, Narishkeit is Narishkeit, but the study of Narishkeit is science. No, it's very interesting. What he meant by that was very important, is that, the superstition is superstition, but the study of the history, the phenomenology of superstition is already the history of religion. That we can study. And Scholem gained his respectability in the academic world because he was a student of mysticism, not necessarily a mystic. But Scholem's thesis was very important. Scholem believed that mysticism was actually the engine of Jewish creativity. That in each generation of Jewish life, you had this small cadre of mystics who were trying to find, who in their search for the presence of God and the expressive ways that they shared it, were really the ones who created the most interesting, creative stuff about Judaism. Now, today what we're going to do is take a look at one particular sect of Jewish mystics called Hasidism, or Hasidut, or Hasidim. The first thing I'm going to ask you to do is not easy to do. I want you to forget everything you know about these people. Because what you think you know about Hasidim is wrong. Right? The black coats, the big beards, the dancing on television, that's not Hasidism. That's a poor parody of what Hasidism really was. Here's what Hasidism was. Ready? A few minutes. Okay. In the Middle Ages, in the Jewish Middle Age, in the Middle Ages, there was one particular theological problem that vexed Jewish thinkers. How can it be that a God who is good and a God who is all-powerful created a world which is so terrible? And every time Jews suffered, this was a terrible question. How could it be that a God who is good and a God who is loving and a God who is so powerful would tolerate a world like this one? And every time Jews suffered, the question returned. It returned in its most powerful form in 1492, when the last Jews of the Iberian Peninsula had been exiled from Iberia by Ferdinand and Isabel. It was the end of 700 years of Jewish civilization in Iberia. And Jews had reached during that time the real zenith of their creativity, of their philosophy, of their art, and they had been great leaders of this civilization. In fact, the Shadchan, the person who made the shidduch between Ferdinand and Isabel, was Don Isaac Abarvanel, was the great the Jewish Secretary of State. And as a wedding present, they stole his property and kicked him out of the country. Now, what happened is after 1492, the Jews spread all over the Mediterranean and North Africa. And one of the most interesting settlements that comes after that moment is the settlement in Tzfat. There were mystics who were working in Spain, but they were very quiet and very private. They come to the northern Israeli city of Tzfat. You guys want to come in? There's plenty of seats. And nice Jews in here. Come on in. Come over here. We got seats over here. Come on. Come in. Got two over here, two on the aisle. Right? Come in. Make yourself at home. You got to. It's dangerous to stand while a rabbi speaks. You could fall asleep and hurt yourself. Come on. So they come to the city of Tzfat, and you have this one of these wonderful, remarkable moments in history when you have a concentration of extraordinarily creative people. This happens in history rarely, but when it happens, it's remarkable. And you have a concentration of remarkably creative people, and mysticism, as it were, comes out of the closet and becomes the public culture of this city. And you have all of these Spanish mystics living in this city, and they're meditating and working on this issue. And into their midst comes a young scholar by the name of Isaac Luria. Luria had come from Spain to Egypt, and from Egypt, where he grew up and was educated, came to Tzfat, lived in Tzfat for only 3 years, 2.5 years, died very young, 37, 38 years old when he, sort of the Mozart of the Jewish mystical tradition, because in 2.5 years, he never wrote a thing. Everything's written by his students. He completely revolutionizes Jewish mysticism. Here's his answer to the question on one foot. It's very complicated in his literature, but basically this is what he said. When God created the world, right, God creates the world in 3 steps. Step 1, God creates a structure of vessels in order to gather in, come back a second. Step 1, God fills the universe. Ein Sof is the word. Ein Sof fills the universe. God has no limits, no boundaries. It's all God. God desires, as it were, to create a physical universe, a material universe. God needs to open up a space inside of God for that universe. So God withdraws from a sector of the universe to create a space for our universe. That withdrawal is called tzimtzum, pulling back, divine restraint, pulling back. And into that inner space, God creates vessels. Vessels to hold divine energy. There are 10 of them, called sfirot. Then God begins to beam creative power into those vessels. Think of light entering a set of lenses. But God, like any artist, so loved the creation he was making that he added too much energy to it, pushed too much in. Too much energy, and the vessels that God had created were not strong enough to hold the light that was being beamed in. It's a very complicated thing in the Lurianic myth, so just take this as a slight, sort of the dummy's guide to Lurianic Kabbalah. Okay, this is the Cliff Notes. And the vessels explode. The vessels explode. Shvirat HaKelim. There's this big bang. We live in the universe of the broken shards. We live in a universe of broken pieces. Sharp edges, jagged corners, broken pieces. And all of those pieces are still filled with all of this divine light. And we have been brought into the universe, we human beings, in order to do the task of tikkun olam. This is where the phrase originally came from. By putting back the pieces of the broken world, bringing them back together, the light within them joins together and shines. So whenever you can find 2 broken pieces of the universe that fit together in the jigsaw puzzle way, you've created a little bit of tikkun. A little bit of tikkun. And that's what you're here to do. That was Luria's myth, more or less. That's Luria's myth. So we live in this world of jagged edges, broken pieces, smashed shards. That's the world we live in. That's why when we come across the sharp edges of the pieces, that's why we experience the world is so painful. That's why this world is filled with exile. God is in exile because God's creation has been destroyed. The world is in exile, and we are the agents of divine repair. So far, so good? So this is Lurianic Kabbalah, and this becomes a myth that fills the world of Jewish mysticism and becomes so dominant. The next century, which is the 17th century, the 1600s, is one of the worst, in Europe, is one of the worst centuries in all of Jewish history. I would say it's the 3rd worst. I think the first, either the 1st or 20th are shared with the worst, and then you get the 17th century. 3 things happen in the 17th century. You have this revolt of the Polish peasantry against Polish landowners, and they ally with the Cossacks under a guy named Chmelnytsky, and they ride through the Polish countryside, destroying Jewish communities. Several thousands, hundreds of thousands perhaps, Jews were murdered in the pogroms of the early 17th century. Terrible slaughter on Polish Jews in the 17th century. Then the second thing that happens is, out of a sense of despair over what they've just seen, the destruction, there rises up a Messiah named Shabtai Tzvi, this crazy bipolar fellow who declares himself the Messiah. And he has the world's greatest PR guy, a guy named Nathan of Gaza. And Nathan of Gaza takes him around and proclaims him the Messiah. And Eastern European Jews are so desperate for some ray of hope in the destruction and desolation that they attach themselves to him. And hundreds, maybe thousands of Jews follow him. And they send their children, they sell their possessions, they follow him, and he begins a crusade to the Holy Land. And when Shabtai Tzvi arrives at the border of the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman Emperor has him arrested. They bring him into the palace, and they basically threaten him: either you convert to Islam or you die. And Shabtai may have been nuts, but he wasn't nuts. I mean, so he converts to Islam. The movement dissipates. A lot of them were taken into slavery. The children were all taken into slavery. And there's this even deeper sense of depression, of desolation, of abandonment among the Jews of Eastern Europe. Then comes the third piece. The rabbis, the leaders of the community, make a read on this situation which is exactly wrong. Rabbis are good at this. They think that the problem is not the desolation, the disillusionment, the dispirited, desperate nature of Jewish life. They think the problem is an excess of Jewish imagination, too much enthusiasm. So out of the crumbled remains after the Chmielnicki massacre and the Shabtai Tzvi uprising comes the rise of yeshiva culture, the rise of Jewish intellectualism. You build yeshivas, and in yeshivas you cultivate the elite of the elite of the elite, the smartest and most pious. And the theology, the ideology of the yeshiva culture is that you, common Jew, you can't ever come close to God. First of all, you're not smart enough, and second of all, you're not pious enough. But what you do is support a yeshiva scholar who is going to pray on your behalf. And his piety and his learning, his stupendous learning, 24 hours a day learning, his will bring divine benevolence in your world. You see, by vesting Jewish authenticity in the yeshiva culture, you clamp down on all that religious enthusiasm. You can't expect anything but the yeshiva guys. They'll take care of it. And you create the elite of the elite of the elite yeshiva world. And now what happens is you have a depressive culture, and you've just made it even more depressive. Because you've said to them, the one thing that you need most, which is the presence, the healing presence of God, is beyond you. You'll never get close to God. You can't pray to God. You're just a stam yid. You're just a plain old Jew, only a scholar. Only a rabbi, but even not a rabbi's rabbi. Only that rabbi can pray to God. So what happens is, by the end of the 17th century, by the end of the 1600s, there's this terrible sense of depression among the Jews of Europe. Now, one of my theses, the other thing I've been talking a lot about in the community, is there is a resilience within the Jewish people which you can't account for. Turns out Haman was right. Right? In the Megillah, in the third chapter of the Megillah, Haman makes a speech to Achashverosh where he says, there's this really strange people in the world who are not like anybody else. And you want to know something? He was right. In the midst, you would expect that a people like this would dissipate, would dissolve, would just disappear, would commit cultural suicide. The exact opposite happens. At that moment, you have a revolution, a renaissance. And there's born in Eastern Europe a young man named Israel ben Eliezer. He's a simple guy, doesn't know a lot. He's not a great scholar, but he has a religious vision. And he begins teaching a religious vision. And that religious vision initiates a revolution in Eastern European Judaism. And that revolution is called Hasidism. Now, he's going to have a student named Dov Ber, who's going to be a real intellectual. And Dov Ber is going to be the one who puts this into words. Here's what Dov Ber interpreted Israel ben Eliezer's revolution. Remember the Lurianic myth of how the world came to be? Remember that one? Remember that the first stage was God filled the whole universe? And God wanted a sector of the universe that would be not God, so God could put the universe in there. Remember that part? That was about 10 minutes ago. You remember what I'm talking about? Said the Baal Shem Tov. Now, Israel ben Eliezer called the Baal. Said Israel ben Eliezer, that never happened. Tzimtzum is an illusion. Tzimtzum never happened. God never deserted the universe. Translation. We live in, among, around of God. It's all God. Those of you who were here a couple weeks ago when Art Green was here heard him articulate this theology. It's pantheism, it's called. God is everywhere. God is in all of it. We are characters in the life of God. We are cells in the body of God. It is all God. Now, if it's all God, what are the implications of that? If it's all God, you don't have to go to a yeshiva to meet God. You can meet God wherever you are. You don't even have to go to shul, Nebuch, you know? Israel ben Eliezer had a job. His job was, he was the guy in charge of taking little kids to school in the morning. He would go from house to house gathering up little kids, and he would take them to cheder in the morning. Not, you don't have to be too bright to do this work, you know? But the story is that Israel ben Eliezer would not take the kids through the town to the school. He would take them the long way through the forest. And he taught them, here is God's sanctuary. Because if God is of all things and in all things, then the trees have God and the birds have God. And you can hear the prayer of the sky and the prayer of the earth and the prayer of the animals. And you can hear the song of nature. And that is God too. That's God's voice speaking to you. Torah speaks God's voice, but so does nature. Torah speaks God's voice, but so does nature. And it's not just the rabbi who owns God. Everyone owns God. The shoemaker, in the kavanah, in the intentionality with which he fixes your shoes, the shoemaker is praying. The baker, in the kavanah with which he makes the bread, the baker is praying. Not just the rabbi, but everyone prays, and everyone has access to God, and God is around you all the time. And the only reason you don't know that God is around you all the time is because you're so damn depressed. And Israel ben Eliezer said, your depression is actually a form of self-absorption. Because you know, when you're depressed, you walk around going, oh, aren't I miserable? Aren't I miserable? There's an I in that sentence, a big one, by the way. And the more depressed you are, the more that I is. I don't know if you have depressive friends. And they come over and say, oh, my life is so terrible, man. After a while, you say, okay, fine. So your life is terrible. Well, get over it. I mean, it's all about me and how miserable. And so the Baal Shem Tov said, the reason why you think God is so far away is not metaphysical. It's not because God actually is far away. It's psychological. Because God doesn't want to dwell in a place where people are depressed. But if God is around you in all things and in all experiences, and the divine is right there, and you are part of the divine, for God's sakes, sing. Dance. So the singing and dancing is actually part of Hasidism, but only in that way. It becomes part of the... Now, the Baal Shem Tov also did magic tricks. He cured the sick. He healed the lame. He made the blind see again. So then he used God's name, so they called him the Baal Shem Tov. That was a name for street magicians. He was on 3rd Street in Santa Monica. You know, he had a guitar. He sold CDs, you know. And he would cure the sick, heal the lame, that kind of stuff. He was the Baal Shem Tov. Dov Ber is the real Magi. Dov Ber is the real philosopher of the movement. And this movement that said to people, stop being so depressed and sing. God is near you. God is present. This becomes a religious movement that sweeps Eastern Europe. That's Hasidism. Hasidism was a revolt against orthodoxy. So you're going to ask me, yeah, but they look pretty orthodox now. Yeah, that's what happens to revolutionaries, you know? In a generation or two, you get co-opted by the very people you were trying to overthrow. But at the beginning, the Orthodox hated the Hasidim because the Hasidim were so into this religious experience business and spreading mysticism that my ancestors were the Litvaks. They were the worst, pedantic, you know, pushy, Orthodox. They threw the Hasidim in jail. They threw the Hasidim in jail, right? Shner Zalman, who was the founder of Lubavitch, was thrown into the jail by the Vilna Gaon, right? Which is really what's so funny that there's. Never mind, I shouldn't say anything. But so here's the great Hasidic story, right? A Hasid and I told you this story before, so you've heard it. A Hasid and a Litvak are having an argument. Could happen. And the Litvak says to the chassid, the problem with you guys is you have no regard for the law. There is a law. When you daven Shachris, when you daven Mincha, when you daven Mariv, when you pray the prayers. There's a law about how you daven and what you say. There's a law. And you Hasidim, you ignore the law, which is true, by the way. And the chassid responds to his friend, the Litvak, and he says, you're absolutely right. I'll tell you what happens. I get up in the morning. I'm ready to daven. I'm going to do it right, on time, in the right way. I take my talis, my tefillin, my siddur. I go to the window. I open the window. Oh, my God, you know what happens? The morning floods into the room. The birds are singing. The air is fresh. I see children going to school. I see adults on their way to work. I am so taken with the life of the morning. I forget to daven till it's too late. So in the evening, I'm determined I will daven on time. I take my siddur, I go to the window, I open the window. My God, you know what happens? The song of the night comes into the room. I see the dark sky, I feel the peace of the landscape. I see families gathered around their hearths in the town. I see the lights of their homes. I see the darkness of the world. I'm so taken with the song of the night, I forget to daven. He says, I have a solution though. Tomorrow, I will close the window. And the Litvak says, God forbid. Which is how you know it's a Hasidic story, right? Now, think of that story for a minute. What's in that story? What's in that story is a conflict between the form of prayer, the rules and regulations, the form of the prayer, and the purpose of prayer, the experience that is within it and behind it. That's classic Hasidism. Hasidism was a revolt against the forms of religious life in the name of their essence. The innerness of religion, says Heschel. The innerness of what religion is supposed to get at. And that idea that experience of God, that experience, that what we call a mystical experience, a transcendent experience, is not reserved just for yeshiva scholars, but is available to everyone. That's classic Hasidism. Now, the Hasidim then took prayer very seriously, because for them prayer was the preeminent religious experience. But what was prayer? Take a look with me. I gave you some sources here. So here's a parable of the Besht. Now, he never wrote anything, so everything is about what was told about him, sort of like St. Francis. It's very interesting, by the way. The tales of the Baal Shem Tov and the tales of St. Francis, there are a lot of the same stories. It's a lot of the same stories, because St. Francis played that role in the Catholic Church, and you have a common source of Eastern Europe, of European mythology, which they drew from. Right? If you ever read Kazanzaki's book on St. Francis, I read this book when I was in rabbinical school, and I said, my God, these are all stories in a Pesht. Right? And if they're not, they should be, So, a mighty king sits on a throne situated in the center of a huge palace with many halls, all of them filled with gold, silver, and precious stones. Those servants of the king who are far more interested in acquiring wealth than in gazing at the king's splendor spend all their time when they're admitted to the palace in the outer halls gathering the treasures that they find. So engrossed are they in this that they never see the countenance of the king, the face of the king. But the wise servants, refusing to be distracted by the treasures in the hall, press on until they come to the king and his throne in the center of the palace. To their astonishment, once they reach the king's presence, they discover that the palace, its halls, and their treasures are really only an illusion, created by the king's magical powers. In the same way, God hides himself in the garments and barriers of the cosmos and the upper worlds. When man recognizes that this is so, when he acknowledges all that is created out of God's essence, and that in reality there are no barriers between man and God, all the workers of iniquity are dispersed. All right, so what do we have? I have this image of a palace full with treasures. And people go in the palace, and as they're going into the palace, they forget that they're going in to see the king, and they become distracted by the treasures. Now, this is a parable on many levels, like all good parables, but in the context that we've just described, what's the palace, and what are the treasures, and who are those servants? The servants are religious Jews. And they go into the palace, which is Torah, the world of religion, of Judaism, and they get distracted by the treasures in the room, which are the rituals and rites and halacha. They get distracted by doing the halacha and doing it right and getting all the points you get for doing it right, for keeping so kosher, so kosher. And they get so into all of that stuff, they forgot why they came. They forgot that the whole purpose of the thing is to come and stand with the king. But the one who's able to look past that and come directly to the king comes to realize that all that other stuff isn't real. It's actually an illusion. Do you hear the Hasidic in that? Right? So what is prayer? Prayer is the journey to see the king. Prayer is the journey to see the king. And the idea is, don't get so distracted. No, I'm going to say some radical things now, because the Hasidim were very radical. Don't let the prayer book get in the way of your prayers. Don't let the rabbi get in the way of your prayers. Don't let the services get in the way of your prayers. Don't let the please rise on page 37 get in the way of your prayers. Don't let anything. You've come to see the king. Why are you stopping in the outer chambers? This is a common motif of literature, of mystical literature. And in the Zohar, which is the original, the Ur text of Jewish literature, the version's actually stronger. The version of this song is the servants go in and they get distracted by the gold and silver in all the rooms and they starve to death. And that's the mystic's idea that if what you're in this for is the careful and meticulous observance of religious law and ritual, you're going to die. You're going to miss the point. So what are we looking for? Take a look at the next one. Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev was one of the great third generation Chassim. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. The principle is that the Creator, may He be blessed, created all. That He is all. Again, those of you who were with Art Green last couple of weeks ago, this is Art's philosophy, right? That His creative energy has not ceased flowing into the world, but rather every moment His creative energy animates His creations. You are all plugged in. You didn't know that you were plugged in because you can't see the plug. You're wireless, right? But you are all plugged in to the source of life, to the source of energy. And becoming aware of that is what prayer is all about. Now, why can't you see that? Because you think that you're a separate entity. You think that you're an individual. You think that you're some kind of a monad walking in the world. Prayer is about dispelling that illusion and feeling the oneness. That's what prayer is about. It's an experience of coming to higher consciousness to understand that you are part of something much bigger than yourself. That sort of ecstasy. Ecstasy literally means coming out of your stasis, out of your normal consciousness to a higher consciousness. That's what prayer is really about. His creative energy has not ceased flowing into the world, but rather every moment His creative energy animates His creations, all the worlds and all the dimensions of reality, all the angels and all the holy creatures, and therefore we recite the blessing, Yotzer Or Vorei Choshech, God who creates light and creates darkness. The verbs in the prayer are stated in the present tense. Yotzer Or means God is creating light and darkness. You're living in a world in which energy is pouring in. And you are you are a vessel. Here's what it says. You are either a vessel or a cork, depending on where you stand in the world. Either you make yourself a vessel, a pipeline, to bring that energy and life into the world, or you make yourself a cork to keep it out. That's good and evil. That's the definition of good and evil. There are people who are vessels and people who are corks. You can quote me on that. Because in every moment God is creating, and in every moment God animates all that lives. Everything is of God. God is all. God includes all. Only when a person humbles himself. Here's the great mystical move. It's bitul hayesh, which means to humble, which means to suppress the ego. Me. Only when you suppress that and you feel, do you get to the point of feeling the presence, you see? Only when you humble the ego, right? So if you've ever been in a Hasidic shtibel and you're male, if you're female, I can't help you, but if you're male. So I used to live in one side of Jerusalem, and Nina, who was my fiance, lived on the other side of Jerusalem. And I used to go shopping 7 o'clock in the morning, Machane Yehuda, and I'd bring all the food to her house, and we'd cook, and then I'd go back to my apartment, and I'd study all day, and then I would have to go back for Shabbos. And between me and my house and Nina's house was a Hasidic shtibel, a little teeny synagogue. It wasn't a synagogue. It was a group of Hasidic guys who met in a bomb shelter under an apartment building in Jerusalem. Jerusalem has bomb shelters everywhere. And they're, thank God, don't have to be used as bomb shelters. So they made it into a synagogue, right? And it happens to be a great synagogue because the acoustics were fabulous, because it has concrete walls and no windows, right? And it's all men. And you'd walk into this room, and there's like 50 men, all of them large. For some reason, these guys are kanai nohara, right? Because they can eat. They figure if God is all, they're going to eat it all, right? All large. I mean, I was the smallest guy, and I'm not exactly small. All large, all in black coats, right? And they'd sit around these benches, right? And the guy would begin to, the first thing they did, do you know, they would, shmek tabik. Where does that, snuff. They'd pass around a snuff box, right? And, of course, I'm a kid from America, so I sneeze real, and I had to laugh, shmek. And then one of the guys begins a nigun, a song. Now, a nigun begins with a word, right? Lechadoidi, likras kala, binhei shabes nikabla. And then they leave the words behind and just sing the song. Yai lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai lai lai, ya la lai lai lai. And then pretty soon the benches get pushed aside and all the guys are up and they start to dance. Yai lai la la lai lai. And they have this room which is full of men. Yai lai la la la. And they go around, and this would be 30, 40 minutes. Each prayer. I mean, I wonder when these guys ever ate dinner, But what happens in the course of that is you lose yourself. You lose yourself in the dance, you lose yourself in the song. Right? You lose yourself in the moment, and that's the idea. You become part of something more. It's an ecstatic experience. That's what he's talking about. Only when a person humbles himself does he come to understand that of himself he is nothing, and his existence comes from God, and so he calls God Yotzer, creator, and realizes that God is always creating. So what is prayer for the chassid? Prayer for the chassid is not the recitation of the words in the book. That's just the beginning. My teacher used to say, it's not a text, it's a pretext. And the pretext is because you get out, once you get to the level of ecstasy, you leave the book behind and you just enter into the moment. It's a mystical experience. Prayer is a shared mystical experience in which I let go of the me and I become part of the all. I become part of the all. Now it's very hard to do because that me, you've been trained since the day you were 2 to say me. But to let go of it and to feel part of the all, that's the ecstasy of prayer, right? Menachem Mendel was the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, right? Menachem Mendel he's the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe. He's the father of the guy that just died, okay? Know that there is no reality in created things. What? Was this one? No, he's the uncle. He's the father-in-law? Father-in-law and uncle, yeah. He's the 6th one. This guy was the 7th, right? Right? Know that there is no reality in created things. To say that in truth all creatures are not in the category of something, of a yesh or a thing, as we see with our eyes. For this is only from our point of view, since we cannot perceive the divine vitality. But from the point of view of the divine vitality which sustains us, we have no existence. We are in the category of complete nothingness, of ephes, like the rays of the sun and the sun itself, from which it follows that there's no other existence whatsoever apart from his existence. You see what they're doing here? They're pushing us beyond our individuation into a world of pantheism. And that's exactly the move. That's exactly the move of Hasidic prayer. Now, one more master, and then we'll take a look at some sources. Nachman of Bratslav was the most interesting of the guys. He's the great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, 4th generation. He was a clinical bipolar. Art Green wrote a biography of him, which is called Tormented Master, which is a wonderful book. And here you have a man, before any of this was written up, who has highs and lows. But instead of seeing his highs and lows as craziness, he sees his highs and lows as the waxing and waning of the divine presence in the world, and interprets his own psychological maladies as a metaphor for what religious life is supposed to be about. So when he has his highs, God is with him all the time, and he proclaims himself Messiah. First he proclaimed his kid Messiah, then his kid died of tuberculosis, so he proclaimed himself Messiah. And then he gets to the low. What do you do when you get to the low? God is so far away. And so much of the philosophy he writes when he's on the low points. And what he says is, when you get to the low points, that's when you have to assert. That's the will. That's the test. Can you assert your faith in God? Can you assert your faith that God is yet present? And your longing for the divine is proof that the divine is real. So this is what he writes. This is just one of the very remarkable feelings. The ikar, the main thing, ikar means the essence of all faith. What's the essence of all faith? It is forbidden to despair. Now, just stop for just a second. Just gather that in. What is religion about? Being human is really hard. Being human is a really difficult state of being. You know why? Because we want to love and we lose the things we love. The people we love die. The world changes. It's hard to do the right thing. It's hard to be human. And it's so easy to fall into depression. So he's using his own depression as a metaphor for what all of us go through. It's really, you don't have to be a bipolar to be depressed. Just turn on a television, It's just, and what the Rebbe is going to say is, and the purpose of faith is to drag you out of that despair, to teach you how to defend yourself against that despair. Because if you get into that despair, you'll never find your way out. You'll never find your way out, right? Even he who stands at the very bottom rung, God forbid, or in the very depths of hell, may God protect us, should nevertheless not despair. Why? He should fulfill the scripture, out of the belly I cried. Be as strong as he can. Even he will be able to return and receive Torah sustenance by means of a tzaddik. So starting with Rabbi Nachman, you have this idea that you need a religious master to help you. And the tzaddik, and this becomes very deeply perverted as time goes on. But at the beginning, it was a lovely idea that there's this person, you find a teacher who's going to rescue you from your despair. The main thing is to strengthen yourself in whatever way you can, no matter how far you've fallen. If you hold on to even the slightest bit, there's a hope that you will return. There's no such thing as despair at all. There's no such thing as despair at all, because when you're despairing, you're still clinging, longing for something. And as long as you're longing for an escape from your despair, as long as the darkness hasn't covered you completely, that's your evidence that there is still a God waiting for you. And now he gives you this analogy, which I think is lovely, because I go to weddings a lot. Ready? Sometimes when people are joyous and dancing. So imagine a wedding. You ever go to a wedding or a bar mitzvah and they get the bride and groom on the chairs, that whole thing, they're throwing them nauseous, They grab a man from outside their dancing circle, one who is sad and melancholy, and force him to join with them in the dance. Thus it is with joy. When a person is happy, his own sadness and suffering stand off to the side. It is a higher achievement to struggle and pursue that sadness, bringing it into the joy until it is transformed. You grab hold of suffering and force it to join with you in the rejoicing. Isn't that an interesting image? You have to bring, you got to bring your whole self, even that depressive side of you, you got to bring it into the circle. And then he goes on, he has a wonderful set of other, and then he talks about meditation on the next page. So what is prayer for the chassid? Prayer is a private religious experience that's practiced on a regular basis. The Bratslaver Hasidim, the followers of Rabbi Nachman, practice a method called hitbodedut.
They also smoke pot.
Well, now they do, not then. Then they just drank vodka. Now they do a little bit of other thing, a little hooch. Listen, anything to get you out of yourself. No. Then they just smoke. Hitbodedut is from the word boded, or lavad in Hebrew, means to be by yourself. Hitbodedut is a form of meditation. And they have very sophisticated traditions of meditation, of going out by yourself in the field, and you do this in the middle of the night, and scream your prayers out. And there's this form of very interesting meditation. Now, what happens here is that the self becomes exhausted, and slowly you let go of the self. And that becomes the image of Hasidic prayer. So Art Green, who was our guest a couple weeks ago, and his student Barry Holtz collected a series of interesting sources on prayer. Just take a look at a couple of these, and then we're going to conclude. Because these were the guys that did prayer the right way. they really took prayer as the central expression of Jewish life. Because in prayer, they were able to feel the truth of the God who wraps around them, right? The wise person will pray his entire life to speak one totally truthful word to God. Now, why does he say that? Because what you do is, what happens when you're praying? What happens when you're praying is you're praying with multiple levels of consciousness, right? So you're praying and then you're watching yourself praying. You know what I'm talking? You do something and so I can't dance. I'm a terrible dancer because as I dance, I'm watching myself dancing, and I say to myself, God, you are really ugly. You know, you are an ugly dancer. And then I can't dance because I become that person watching myself doing it. You know what I'm talking about? It's become very, very self-conscious. Like the worst, can I tell you a prurient example of this? If you go to Barnes & Noble, Oliver Sholem, there's a whole... I discovered once, I was wandering around, Nina was shopping for something, I was wandering around, and there's a whole wall of books, self-help books on how to make love. And then, and they're all very useful. Pictures, they're very useful. And they're all these how to do it, 365 positions and and games to, and the funny thing is it's right next to the recipe books, And I had this conflation of the two because I can imagine lying in bed with the book going, no, turn a little bit that way, no, a little bit more, not that, no, too much, go back. It's like. How can you read a book that tells you to do something? Because then you're we're not doing it right. You become conscious of, and only in America. America is such a culture of doing it right. We're such a culture focused on technique. That only Americans would write. Italians don't write books on how to make love. Drink some wine, gather the person in your arms, and amore, Italians don't have to worry about this. It's just French people, French people don't do. They just. But Americans are no. I got to do it right. I'm going to practice now, So here's the thing, and you get once you've read one of these books, you can never make love again because you're always saying to yourself, oh, it was so much better last Thursday, So what happens is, how do you do it without feeling self-conscious about it? And Americans, by the way, we're worse. Because it's not just Jews. We're very self-conscious about all of this. We sit in shul very stiff, right? You're not allowed to have any emotions in synagogue. You don't have a body in synagogue. 3.5 hours of services. So you must check your body at the door because nobody can sit in a chair for 3.5 hours. I was in Chicago on Thursday. I flew home. About 2 hours into the flight, my back is killing me. My tush is numb. Get up. It's a tiny little plane. Now I know what it feels like to sit in shul. Never terrible. And they don't have a drink cart in shul. That's the problem. We ought to have a drink cart. High holidays. Wouldn't that be nice? Coke, a Diet Coke, orange juice. I'll get you a decaf coffee. Wouldn't that? I'm telling you. So what does he say? You spend a lifetime trying to do this without any self-consciousness. You spend a lifetime practicing prayer so that at one moment, so the interesting question is, have you ever been in that moment where prayer became totally unself-conscious? Right? Where anything became totally unself-conscious. But let's talk about prayer. Because then the self gets left behind and you become the act. You see what he's talking about? Totally unself-conscious. You're not worried about what page am I on? Am I doing it right? Am I standing? Is my suit wrinkled? Does my tush look too big? You're not into all of that. You're into the moment. It's what the psychologists call flow. You're so into the moment that when it ends, you can't believe you were there because you were so far away from your normal state of being. Right? Before you pray, listen to this next one. Before you pray, decide that you're ready to die in that prayer. Now, but think about what he's trying to say. You're trying to give yourself over to that prayer. Right? There's some people so intense in their worship who give up so much of their strength in prayer that if not for a miracle, they would die after uttering a word or two. It's only through God's great kindness that such people live, and their soul doesn't leave them as they're joined to God in prayer. Forget prayer for just a second. You ever been into anything like that? You ever watched a play and been so into the play That you forgot that you were sitting in a theater watching a play, right? Or that the actor you were watching isn't the character you were watching, right? You ever have that sense? I once got to see James Earl, early in his career, James Earl Jones used to do theater, and he used to be thin. And he did Othello once at the Mark Taper. Everyone know the Mark Taper? It's a tiny little theater, and we had like amazing seats. And you're sitting there, and you could feel his physicality. The man could project. I mean, he's a big, big, big man. You remember The Great White Hope? Remember that? It was the same time that movie came out. He played Othello. And you could, it was scary, that the physicality of this man. And he could project that physicality. And you were I was so engrossed in this. Like when the lights come back on, it's like, whoa. You ever had, that's what he's talking about. The complete loss of self in a moment. So I was once in believe it or not, me of all people, I was once in a dance performance with a modern dance group. So there is a Messiah. And I had a long time, I was working with these people, and I got to know these dancers, and I asked them, like, when I do this, I'm so self-conscious. How do you do it? He said, that's why I do it. He says, because when I dance, I lose all self-consciousness. I become the dance. I don't think about the steps. I don't think about the movements. The movements become me. I become the movements. I lose myself, and I wake up at the end. It's such a beautiful thing, right? So the notion of losing yourself in the moment, so totally that you become the words you're praying, and the words you're praying become you. You become the prayer, right? Here's another one. Ready? The purpose of prayer is to uplift the words, to return them to the source above. The world was created by the downflow of letters. The task of man is to form those letters into words and take them back to God. Isn't that a nice idea? So if we were to pray properly, if we were to do Hasidic prayer, so the first, besides getting comfortable in your seats and taking off your shoes, I said, all right, what happened to you this week that you'd like to bring back to God? Either what happened this week that was so beautiful and so remarkable and uplifting that you'd like to return it to God, or what happened this week that was so terrible and so painful that you want to go give it back to God. I mean, what are you bringing to your prayer this week, right? Because if you don't bring something, what are you doing? You can't pray the same as you did last week. You're different. So what do you bring into the prayer? That's what I think he would ask, right? If you come to know this dual process, your prayer will be joined to the constant flow of creation, word to word, voice to voice. The words fly upward and come before God. As God turns to look at the ascending word, life flows through all the worlds, and prayer receives its answer. So what's the answer to prayer? The energy that comes from the selfless experience, the energy that comes from the exhilaration, the inspiration, the ecstasy that comes from that moment of selflessness is the answer to the prayer. So you don't get anything. It's not a thing. It's that you regain life in a certain way, right? All this happens in an instant, and this happens continually. Time has no meaning in the sight of God. That's why people always say, why are the services so long? I say, no one ever complained to the Rolling Stones that they played too long. No one ever says, we made love too long. No one ever says, you're in a symphony. I always love this. Or a concert. I like music. You go to a concert, and when the thing is over, the crowd rises and screams, keep playing. Encore. No one ever does that in shul, You finish a Don Olam. No one ever says, Rabbi, do the Shemona Esrei again. Give us another Shemona Esrei. Why? It's not, because it's not a matter of time. It's a matter of engagement. If you're engaged in the moment and that flow of energy is happening, you don't want it to end. I don't want to let it go. And by the way, and someone said, why do we have to pray the same stuff over again? Joni Mitchell once gave a beautiful concert, and she said, and someone screamed out the name of a song they wanted her to sing, and she stopped and said, isn't it funny? No one ever stopped Van Gogh on the street and said, paint Starry Night again, man. But I want to hear the songs that I know. Because I know the song, I can lose myself in the song. It's actually harder if you go to a concert and if you, my kind of concert, go to a concert and they say, we're going to play something new. Oh, I don't want you to play that I have to listen to. I don't want to listen to it. I want to get in it. I want to lose myself in it, right? Play Starry Night again, man. I was like, right? Right? But if you go to the Van Gogh Museum, it's like one of the best places to daven in the world is in Amsterdam in the Van Gogh Museum, right? Because you have to wait in line now. There's like 1 million people there, but you get in finally, and it's amazing. You can stand there in front of sunflowers, Van Gogh's on, and you just and you feel this tap on your shoulder, and the guard comes over and says, "Sir, you've been here a half an hour. You really ought to move along." And I said, "But I'm davening. I got kavana finally, because because this guy saw. I mean, this is what he did, right? He paints sunflowers. That's his way of giving back to God what God gave to him. Now, granted, he's a meshuggah, but you see, in a certain way, but it's important to say this. In a certain way, ecstasy, mystical ecstasy, and prayer is very close to psychosis. It's a loss of self. That's what he says. That people die in their prayers, and only because God loves them do they come back to life. You go into the mystical journey, and it's only because something brings you back. Otherwise, you'd stay there. You wouldn't ever leave the shul. I mean, if prayer worked, you should never leave shul. Right? You see what they're trying to get to? Right? Take yourself out of the words of your prayer. That's it. That's where it is, right? Let your prayer not be for yourself or your household, but only for the sake of God and His presence. If you're praying for something, you're in this world. You're yourself again, right? A person should be so absorbed in prayer, he's no longer aware of his own self. There's nothing for him but the flow of life, for all his thoughts are with God. He who still knows how intensely he is praying has not yet overcome the bonds of self. So that's the self-consciousness, right? The guy who's praying with all this kavana, and there's a little part of him going, my God, am I a wonderful Jew? What a wonderful Jew am I? Right? What a wonderful Jew am I? Look at me praying. People must be looking, saying, ugh, what a good Jew is he. That's not prayer, that's idolatry. That's idolatry. Right? That's exactly the point, right? If you're performing, you're not praying. You have to be, it's the selflessness of the thing, right? And here's the last one. What is dveikut? Dveikut is the word that the tradition, the Hasidic tradition, the mystical tradition first, and then the Hasidic, that's the goal. The word lidabek means to cling to something. Literally, in Hebrew, davek is glue. To be glued to God. Right? So the most beautiful thing is what happens is in Genesis it says a man leaves his father and mother and he's glued to his wife. They become one flesh. Marriage, love, is the loss of self, right? That's what it's supposed to be. Right? If you go into a relationship and all you can think about is what I'm getting out of the relationship, you're not in a relationship. Right? You're in it for yourself. You're worship. And then Ruth and Naomi are glued to each other. There's this Ruth leaves her family and is glued to Naomi, right? So the mystical tradition has this image that in prayer what happens is you achieve, the goal is dveikut, to achieve that attachment, that glue to God, right? What is this dveikut? Now, the fact that they have to ask the question already means that they recognize that they're asking for something which is impossible. If it was easy to achieve, you wouldn't have to define it. The fact that they're asking the question means they know that they're asking of you something which is enormously difficult and at best transient. It's a moment or two and then it's gone, right? Some say it is holding fast to each word. There's a wonderful Hasidic tradition, which you should try sometime, by the way. Spend 5 minutes on each word. Right? You can't do that in our shul, because in our shul we have the davening dynamics class. If you can't daven 1,000 words a minute, you can't pray at Valley Beth Shalom, because we're in a hurry. This is the legacy of my teacher, right? But suppose you open the book, and instead of davening that fast, you just started. First word, Baruch. Blessing. Who is my blessing? What have been my blessings this week? To whom have I been a blessing? What would it mean to be a blessing all the time? Who are the people who have been my blessings? They don't even know they've been my blessings, right? How many blessings are in my life? How many blessings have I had today that I didn't even pay attention to? They didn't say, spend 5 minutes on the word Baruch. Then, Atah. Right? You. What does it mean, you? Imagine that. I'm a fully self-contained, self-possessed human being. And I can confront another fully self-contained, self-possessed human being, and we can communicate. We can talk. Who are the atahs of my life, the you of my life, who makes me me? Who in my life do I need so much that if that person weren't in the world, I wouldn't be me? Spend 5 minutes on every word. It'll take you 6 months to finish a service. But when you finish, you'll be a different person. Try this, by the way. I'm not kidding.
Could we try it here?
Yeah, no, you can try when you go into shul in a minute, because I got to leave in a minute, because you may have dveikut, but I got a job. But you see, but try praying that way. Say what?
That would be if we took one prayer and did just what you're...
Spend the whole morning on one prayer, right? Right. Aleinu. Right? Lishabeach. La'adon. Hakol. I mean, take each word and meditate on that word for 5 full minutes. We had an experience once. There was a fellow who was related to a member of the shul, who was a wonderful, wonderful teacher of Buddhism. And he came to visit, and I asked him to teach a class for us. Many, many years ago, some of you were there. And he says, I'm going to teach you a little meditation. And he taught us how to meditate. Sit in your chair, put your feet on the floor, take a deep breath, and a little bell. He says, we're going to do this for 3 minutes. Jews are so... He rings the bell. Like the first minute, everyone's like, okay, I'm cool. The second minute, it's like, oh. By the third minute, it's like, people are checking cell phones. Jews can't take 3 minutes of silence. It's an amazing... But so if you took 5 minutes on every word, so you go, the first 2-3 minutes are interesting. The next 2 minutes are boring. And then if you're able to sit with it, you come out of the boredom and you achieve insight. Something happens. So do this, try this. Just don't pray the whole Amidah. Pray one word. And every time you come back to shul, move to the next word. I mean, seriously, it'll take you a year to finish the Shemona Esrei. But by the end, you'll know something about yourself, about the world. You'll be, and then if not, just stay there, you know. Just don't go. If I say turn to page 37 and stand, just sit on page 36. I won't yell at you, I promise you, right? Some say that holding fast to each word, man's attachment to each word is so great that he cannot bear to part with it. I mean, so what happens is, if you sit with that word, after a while, it's like you fall in love with the word. Baruch, like, why would I want to leave to another word? I like this word. No, it's a very famous Hasidic story about a master, and he's sitting on this one page of Talmud all day. So the student comes over and he says, Master, I mean, you certainly finished this page a long time ago. Why don't you move to the next page? And he said, why? I like this page. You know? I mean, you live in that world, you see? You live in that world. But others say that this attachment comes to one who truly fulfills God's commandment. He makes his body a throne for his mind a throne for his spirit, and spirit a throne for the soul. So you have to calm this is meditation. Calm the body, and calm the mind, and then calm the spirit, and then feel the soul. So calming the body means letting the itches and giggles and pains come and go, right? And then calming the mind, which is all those million lists you have in your mind about, you know, where you need to be and what you need to be doing. And then calming the spirit is letting the emotions come and go. And then that's meditation. That's how they teach you to meditate. And then slowly something happens. There's this sort of oneness that comes across you, right? Right? Then his soul too becomes a throne for the light of the presence that rests upon him. The light spreads forth around him, and he at the center of that light trembles in joy. These guys took prayer really seriously. But for them, prayer was very different than what we call prayer. For them, what we call prayer was only a pretext. It was a beginning. What you were supposed to do then was really engage in this deep meditation in which one loses the self and the oneness of the world in God. And this is what the Hasidic tradition. Next time, when we come back, hopefully you'll come back, I'd like to take a look at some of the modern masters of Heschel and Buber and Schulweis about what they did with prayer. prayers. So we've seen Bible, we've seen rabbis, we've seen the Hasidic tradition. Next time we're going to take up the modern masters. Have a very good Shabbos.